there we go. So, animal sculpture. There's lots of things to remember so that you can get a sculpture that's not going to stand stably. Remember, it's about 10 inches in one direction, so you're thinking like the size of a piece of paper. It can be sideways, it can be tall, but about piece of paper size to give you that, I don't know, that size, that shape is what you're looking for. And what you want to do is make sure you have either a tripod or laying down or sitting so that it stands 4 feet is hard. So if you can get another stance, it's much easier than that. It needs to be realistic. It needs to be based on pictures, which is why we spent time doing these yesterday, because you want it to be like that animal with the surface that relates to it, not like a bald cat or something like that, scales on fish, things like that. And then you want views, multiple views of all sides and angles so that you can sculpt it more easily. So realistic, from pictures. Ooh, and hollow. That was the other one. If anything more than an inch thick, you run the risk of it exploding in the kiln, so you want to make sure that it's going to be, this is going to be a problem. My bag's not used to bags. So you want to make sure that it's not too thick. So, to get started, what you're going to do is make an armature. Who remembers what an armature is? My arm is holding up the clay. An armature also holds up the clay, but it stays in place, right? So an armature acts like a skeleton inside a form. I knew there was something I didn't have as I was standing there. I forgot tape. We are going to improvise. All right, so I want to make an armature that is about the shape of my frog. I'm going to make a frog. Now, as you do this, you need to be thinking about how it's going to sit in space. So I'm going to look at this one. I'm basically going to make an oval to do this, and I'm going to kind of prop it up while I'm working on it so that the top sits up until it's stable. But I need something to keep that hollow, and that's what my armature is going to be. My armature is made of fancy newspaper. Very easy. I can sculpt it, move it, but it's not the size of my frog. I have to remember this is smaller, otherwise I'm going to get a weird giant frog. And students will often do things and you're like, why is it so big? Well, because you made your frog that big. I like to take one big sheet, and after I'm going to do 2 little ones. That's weird. Clay in my mouth. Perfect. So I'm going to make, because the body is thicker than the top and bottom, so I'm going to take 2 small sheets here, move these off to the side, and crumple them, and then I kind of make it like a little present. I'm going to wrap it up like wrapping paper, and I'm going to go like this, like so.
This is like what I did for my head, right?
This is what?
This is what I did for my head.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then normally I would take a piece of tape and go like here, and maybe another loop around here. I'm not going to mummy wrap this thing. It's not a little mummy baby. Oh, little baby! See, Linda would be excited about that. But that's just a waste of tape. You need a couple pieces to hold your wrapping paper together. Now, this means my frog, if I were to set him here, you know, he would sit in the space. He's going to be about 10, 12 inches long. This is number of paper is 8.5 by 11, so it's a good guideline for me. All right, so now I'm going to take pieces of clay, and these are some slabs I found in the bucket, so they work out well. And I'm going to, these are pretty thick actually, these are, what a good find. And I'm going to start to wrap these around this clay. And as I do that, I can take little pieces and pound them out. I don't want anything more than 1 inch thick. So your knuckle trick is about 1 inch. So I want it thinner than this. And I'm going to overlap them and loop them together, and I'm going to try and build this thing. Your goal is to build this in 1 day. Get the structure. And I'm like, what? That's crazy. I hear you. But I'm not defining anything. I'm not doing any careful like edges. I'm getting a structure or a gesture. So armature, what's that word mean again? What's an armature?
It's like an outline.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Something inside the clay, right? Gives it its shape. This clay's a little bit on the dry side. You want nothing too gooey because you want it to hold its shape, but this is kind of falling apart, so not this dry really either. But what I'm doing right now, am I smoothing it? No! Those of you who have the smoothing disease, you're going to have to resist on this first day because you just got to get the thing built. you want to get, a gesture is typically thought of as a drawing, but you can do a gesture in sculpture too. It's like a quick form. It's the essence of the object, you know? So I'm getting a structure for this frog in place.
Are we starting today or tomorrow?
I'm going to be starting tomorrow. So I'm going to show you lots of different things, so it might take a little bit. So I'm going to, notice how I thinned it out, and then I take these pieces, and I don't recommend actually like rolling slabs for this because it just, I feel like it kind of wastes your time. You can just grab some clay and pound it out. But I'm taking these pieces, I overlap them and lute them together. My goal always is to make it one piece of clay, because one piece of clay, as it shrinks, as it's drying, and as it goes in the kiln, will shrink together. Two pieces of clay that aren't really bonded together will shrink apart. And then it'll be weaker as opposed to stronger as it is drying out. So I'm luting these pieces together, squishing them all together. Let's see, do I have anything wetter? Hopefully. Get these bits out of here. And the nice thing about having these small slabs like this is that they, let's go this way, is that I can really move them around. So I'm luting these pieces on, I can twist them and move them and make them become the structure of my frog. But by getting a gesture or like a basic form for this animal in one day, what I can do then, when I think about it, I should have done something like a dog because more people have those. Too late now. All right, there we go. So you can see I'm actually doing okay here. I don't have any tape on my armature. There we go. Nice. If you're mad at anybody, it's the perfect time to just, take it out on the clay. Make it all good. There we go. Come on, come on. Fold this over. Look at that. Don't you see it? This is my frog. But if I look at the side view of the frog and take his legs off, it's not far off from his body right here. Right? So I've looked at this. People who sculpt, actually, they may take anatomy classes, believe it or not. They look at the structure, successful sculptors who make things realistic, I would say. Not everybody makes things realistic, but if you're going to make something realistic, you need to look at the anatomy of what it is you're creating. That means, like, look at the shape of the body. Like we all know, think of an elephant right now. Do you picture it? What is the shape of the elephant's hip? Do you know?
Circular?
What about a giraffe? What's the shape of a giraffe's hip? An elephant's back actually kind of comes up, and their leg like slides into it. You don't really see it. A giraffe, what about that one? It's like a diamond shape almost. I would have no idea unless I'd help someone try to draw one. And we're like, whoa, that's crazy. Look at the shape of its hip. I don't know. I didn't know this. But because they had a reference that showed us a realistic photograph, we were able to figure it out. So again, I'm not smoothing this, but I am, let's see, maybe this will be the front. Yeah, like this. The back is pretty flat and it kind of narrows. I'm gonna use this actually as the back because then I can narrow it and it's a little stronger instead of the top. Now, if I look at the top of it, I see that it narrows this way, so I gotta get this here. So what I'm doing here, my clay is not super soft, it's a little bit on the drier side, so as you're choosing clay, you could do that. It helps keep its shape a little better. But as I'm doing that, I'm gonna kind of like knock it around and, you know, maybe around my hand for the top to get that part, kind of even it. But as I do this, I'm not real gentle with it, right? Be kind to animals. But this guy you can just beat on, it's fine. But you want to get it in place to kind of be that shape. Remember how with, where is it? Over here. With your coil pots, to even out the sides. We kind of tapped them. This works for these too. This has got a little bit of glaze on it still, but that's all right. So I can even out my shape. Kind of even it this way. It's not perfect, but in a day, I want to get the basic structure of this animal down. So I gotta get some legs on here today, right? Gotta go fast. All right, so here's this guy. This is coming up here. This evens in. This comes narrower here. This side needs to come in a little more. I'm checking my picture. Looks all right. His legs kind of stick out. Now, for his legs, I do not want to have to deal with scoring and slipping little bits and pieces in here. That does not work well. What does work well is the more that I can keep one piece of clay to start, the stronger it's going to be because it's already one piece of clay. Like if I wanted to, if I score and slip like this section of the leg and this section and this little foot, it's not going to stay together. It's all these joints that are like kind of weak spots. But if I take a piece of clay, how come all my clay's so dry? Picked out dry stuff. Let's roll it a little bit because this has got to be long. I can do a couple things. I could take a more solid piece and carve into it to be his leg, or I could bend it. What do I want to do? Maybe I'll carve. I'll bend a little, I'll carve a little. I'll show you a couple options. So as I'm doing this, as the leg gets further from his body, it thins out. And they're big, like these are big, powerful legs. So it's easy to think of like, oh, these little legs and make them small, but they're actually pretty big. So this is gonna be the leg on the side, and then I'm gonna take this, bend it, and you see how as I bend it, it breaks? Anytime you bend clay, let's find a piece here. This is real dry. If I just go like this, it breaks. It definitely wants to break apart. If, as I bend, I push it continually into itself, what happens is I can take that same piece of clay and I'm compressing it as I'm doing that. And what's going to happen is I get that joint and it's actually strengthened because I've pushed the clay into itself. And then, if I were doing a little frog, because I think I made this one a little short, I could flatten a piece. Maybe this will be like his front leg if he had tiny legs. You ever seen a Saturday Night Live tiny hand sketch? You know how tiny hands can be kind of, you ever seen like those fake tiny hands? No.
I think of a doll.
There's a student had him in my photo class the other day, a couple of years ago, where they found like these little plastic tiny hands. They took photos of someone with like their shirt pulled in and a little tiny hand sticking out. It was very creepy looking, but funny. So now I could do something like this. This looks like not right. It needs a little balls on the end, but it's all one piece, so it's a lot stronger than if I tried to attach these little guys. So the more you can keep one piece, the better. So what I'm going to do here with this is I've made his leg. Oop, just kind of messed up that curve there. So I messed up here. I want it to look like more of a bend. So I'm going to do things like this the whole time I'm working. I'm going to use sculpting tools, wooden sculpting tools, as much as I possibly can to make these things fit on the side. Huh?
Wouldn't you say that's like too thick for?
It's a little thick, but he's a big frog. So where it connects to his body, I'm gonna thin it because it's actually coming out of his body. So if I look at it here, oh, this is the wrong way. Sure. It's gonna come out. This is like this. This was supposed to go that side. Can I do it this way? Sure, there you go. That works. Let's get that groove in there again. And the same kind of thing, I'm pressing the clay into itself as I'm doing this. So this comes out here, and then this bends back, and then his foot sticks out here. Again, if I weren't just doing this for a demo, I would start over and get a bigger piece so his foot was part of the same piece of clay. But I want to move on to the next part to show you guys. So I would do like this. This kind of comes up. His foot is down below. This is like this. This is going to sit up. So I'm going to take a blob of clay. This blob works to support it while I'm working. If you have to build supports, get yourself a board, wrap it in plastic so that it doesn't dry out your clay. This is going to sit upright. Here's his mouth. Here's the side. this would sit here. I'm gonna loop this piece in, because this is like his leg would come out the side there. If you have an animal that has thicker legs, and then this tucks underneath, and as you see those things, you could add, because this is getting dry, a little score and slip right here, but you want to do most of your building by luting. It's going to be a lot stronger, like I said, to make it one piece of clay. Let's get this stuck in here. Yeah, this clay's too dry. This kind of narrows. But I'm not being gentle with it. I'm really just sort of pushing things in and moving them around. And then his foot, I would cut, you know, like I showed you with the little guy. I would cut the pieces out, maybe flatten the little end pieces. So it looks like this. It's rough, but do you see it? Again, I might go a little bit more, I might thin it a little bit. It's a little on the thick side, but it's not so bad. His back legs, depending on which type of frog I look at here, they're really thick. So that's actually pretty close. So as I look at those, that's there. And I'm looking at this all the time. This must be out while you're working. It doesn't help you to have references if they're in your locker. They're a waste of your time in there. Now, let's see. For his little mouth. As I look at this, I love all these different sculpting tools. There's a total variety of these over there because they give you nice changes in nice options, I should say, in what you actually make his mouth. So this is, it's not, I don't want to draw ever. This is a sculpture. It's all about depth. So the more I can push into it or take out of it or add a piece to it, the more depth I'm adding. If I draw, I'm just making a line. I'm not drawn. There's nothing on me, on animals, that are drawn. It's all has depth. So I want to create that on my creature, right? Now, for an eyeball, if I was doing an animal that has like a socket, remember when we did the people, you pressed in a socket and added an eyeball? So something like that would work in a piece like that. And here, I'm gonna take my loop tool and I'm actually gonna create a hole and then even it. I like to do things with eyes in my hand first. And this could be an eyeball in a doggy or something, but think about where on the animal the eyes are. Sometimes they're on the side, sometimes they're closer, you know, like you gotta get that proportion down. I can help you if you wanna find it. With a frog, it's like this. And then you wanna get an eyeball, right? They don't just hang out there on the edge. There's the softer stuff I had, here we go. And then I can take, what am I at here, 52? Maybe I take something like this, clean up that edge so I don't have to clean it up while it's on there. And then I can go like this. Let's take off my extra. Like so. So now he's got that there. Do we see him yet? He looks how happy he is. He needs some more realism. He's looking a little cartoony right now. So I might do things like, now I could come over and I'm gonna do his other leg. Is this big enough? I don't think so. Same idea. I want it all one piece. I'm just gonna do a real thick coil to start. And I would make all these things connect. Now, some of you are gonna have a separate head to work with too. If you have a separate head that's typically a lot smaller, I recommend making it solid and then hollowing it after. That's another way to do it. You can like slice it off, give them a little lobotomy, you know, a lobotomy is brain surgery. So here, this kind of comes out here, so I flatten this part, bend by pushing it together again. Oh, I could have used my little leg that I did. And then this comes out like this. Bend it that way, flatten it but not too much. And I can start to cut these out. And again, I want it all there in a day. I don't have to refine these pieces now. I'm gonna refine them all in the next few days. And this comes in.
Miss Rosen, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm making a zebra and like the legs, like I'm gonna make it about the size of a paper, and when I'm
Right.
making the legs, should I let, like when I make like an outline of the body, I won't I don't know, make the like. Would I let the legs like dry and then start like building?
I'd put support under them.
Support, okay.
So because you want to see how they fit.
Okay.
And kind of like so. So obviously this needs some refinement, right? But you can start to see how the structure comes together. And I want to talk a little bit about surface because he's not going to be perfectly smooth. I like these frogs that have textures and lines and blobs and things. So if it's 3D, I might actually even take little pieces of clay, some of these little bumps and lumps, and put those in there, glue them in, and define them. But I can do some of this texture. Look at these guys have these lines down their back. By how I, like maybe I get these little bumps, actually pressing things in and kind of coming around with these. But notice I'm not drawing them, I'm pressing them in. And then I can do all kinds of things for textures, like just pressing things in around it and going different directions to get like that sort of scaly look that they have. Sometimes a sponge or a toothbrush can give it. If I'm doing an animal with fur, the direction and the length of the fur, sit up please, are important. So I want to do something like with a needle tool or a piece like this. Brandon, sit up please. And then I would, like if this is a fur, if I go like this for fur, it's going to look like stripes. If I do something like where the direction changes, but not entirely, like a dog's fur tends to like go in one direction or like around the mouth and the ears, it'll kind of move away from it. So I might do something that generally goes in that direction, but leads kind of like this. And if I get little pieces, I can lift them off, or I can wait till it's dry and just brush it, and all those will come out. I do have, you know what, I gave it to an AP student. I do have a couple little wire things that have like 4 or 5 wires on them. It's like a needle, but they're short and wiry, and you can kind of spread them out a little more or less, and those work really nicely to make.
Wouldn't like a fork be the next thing, like the needle thing? Like the fork, wouldn't it do the same thing?
It would, and you can add multiple things on top of each other too. No, she still got it. To get different effects, but play with things. I mean, if you're doing scales, this can be really nice for scales. Like you can do like rows like this, and then do rows like this, and that's just a knife, or I like the end of a circular loop tool for scales too. You can get a nice scaly look with something like that. But your surface should relate to the animal. It should be something that's relating to it. So your first day is just to get the gesture, get it all like together, nice and quick. Think of proportions. Is the head big enough for the rest of the body? Things like that. No details. And then your second day is going to be using like your wooden sculpting tools and saying, all right, this needs to be actually luted in better. You know, this needs to be a little more, this needs to come in a little, maybe shave a little off of here, push a little down here, make sure that these joints are good, stuff like that. And then after your third day of that, then it's like adding the details and putting things in and starting to think about this. But if you get that structure on the first day, it's amazing how much easier it is to start building and moving other parts toward it. So that's kind of your goal with that. The last thing you want to do is make sure it's hollow. If it's not hollow, then that's very sad. And I often see sculptures where like a leg falls off, things like that. So you have to make sure everything's attached, and you have to make sure the body cavities unite. You know what that means? Sounds weird, doesn't it? Make sure the holes inside connect. Nutshell. So like if you decide this is too thick and it looks like, or you have something like that that's kind of on the border, you can come in from the bottom where no one's gonna see it and just take out a chunk of it if you need to. So like now that's a lot less likely to explode, and you know, if I have something thick like that. If I have, this is empty, right? The newspaper you can leave in, that'll just like disintegrate. Sometimes it gets really tiny and the text is like that big. But this, air has to get out, so it's really important that I leave some sort of hole. And if you have like eyes that are holes or something, the hole doesn't have to be here in the bottom, but you do need to make sure there's a place for the air to get out. If this was a hole, I'd have to make sure that at some point I connect these two holes or I vent this. Hollow and vented. That's the key, making sure you have both of those things. So nothing more than an inch thick, hollowed and vented. That's what's important. Connect the cavities, make sure everything is done for sculpting in depth, no more than 1 inch thick, I said, trying to make sure I covered everything. So I end up, see, when he's dry, he would stand. And I'd have his other leg here to help support him. But for now, he's a little help. Get by with a little help, my friend. Make sense?